Hello everyone, so Vegan Footsoldier elaborated a bit more on some of the issues he has with my position on wild animal suffering, and I thought I'd go through the video and give you my thoughts. So I just want to make the point that there is no vegan beef between me and Vegan Footsoldier. I've known the guy for a while, I like the guy, and this is just a philosophical disagreement. We seem to agree on a hell of a lot more things than we disagree about. We're both vegan, we're both activists, but this, like I said, is just a philosophical disagreement. So moving on.
I want to be able to have the freedom to climb Mount Everest and suffer and potentially die as a result. I want that freedom. I don't want someone to turn me away after I've got to Nepal saying, no, if you climb this mountain, you'll probably suffer and you might even die. So I'm here to reduce suffering in the world. So you're not allowed to climb this mountain. You don't have the freedom to climb this mountain because I am prioritizing reducing your suffering over the freedom that you have to go about your way and do what you want to do.
I don't think there should be suffering police preventing people from climbing Mount Everest. I think people should be free to make choices for themselves, providing they sufficiently understand the circumstances of their situation and aren't harming any other sentient beings with that choice. I think in order to achieve the greatest possible good in the real world, it is potentially essential to take preferences into account. This is because in the real world, whether or not our preferences are satisfied typically impacts our well-being. Even if it was our decision to climb Mount Everest, if we did break our leg, we would want relief from our suffering if we began to die a slow and painful death. It's easy to imagine that the suffering from someone attacking me and breaking my leg would be worse than the suffering from me climbing a mountain and breaking it myself, because I chose to take on those risks when deciding to climb the mountain. And that could affect how I rationalize the pain. It could affect the emotional and psychological effects that come with the pain. But if for a moment we imagine that the suffering truly is equalized, including the physiological and the psychological components of well-being, then I just can't see any reason to say that one is worse than the other. In relation to wild animals suffering, well, wild animals never chose to be in the situation they're currently in. And they certainly didn't decide to take on the risks associated with living life in the wild. Wild animals are being thrown into a situation where they're likely to suffer intensely and then die after, on average, just a fraction of their potential lifespan. They didn't choose this. And just as in my hypothetical scenario where I didn't choose someone to break my leg, animals didn't choose to slowly starve to death as an infant.
And if someone comes up to you and says, if you don't eat this one burger, I'm going to eat 2 burgers, and so you eat the one burger to prevent the other person from eating 2 burgers, well, Humane Hancock says that he would eat the burger. Eating the beef burger is perpetuating the idea that cows are commodities that can just be exploited by humans for food.
I agree that we don't want to perpetuate the idea that animals are commodities. I think this is a reasonable attitude because perpetuating such a belief would likely increase the probability that animals aren't just viewed but are also treated as commodities, and that this in turn would cause them a great amount of suffering. However, in the hypothetical where we choose between eating 1 burger ourselves versus someone else eating 2 burgers, we are making a decision between 2 possible worlds. In the first one, only 1 burger gets eaten, or let's assume 1 animal gets killed. In the second world, 2 burgers get eaten, let's assume 2 animals get killed. If this is the choice we face, I think it would be right to choose world 1. Let's choose the world where fewer animals are killed and fewer animals are treated as commodities. And thus let's choose the world where we eat 1 burger ourselves as opposed to another person eating 2 burgers. I would like to add that if we change the hypothetical in such a way that eating 1 burger ourselves will perpetuate the idea that animals are commodities more so than another person eating 2 burgers would, and if this effect would then translate into more animals suffering the consequences of being treated as commodities because people view them as such, then I would choose the other option. As you can probably see by now, what matters to me here is again the amount of suffering caused and the number of animals being killed, not who is eating the burger. And I think it's safe to assume that that's what would matter most to the animals as well.
The problem with trying to solve the shortcomings of act-based utilitarianism with rule utilitarianism is the fact that rule utilitarianism folds back into act utilitarianism the second you start to test the boundaries of where the rules lie.
I use rule utilitarianism as an example to illustrate that even from a consequentialist perspective, rules can be a good thing to implement which, if consistently followed, can lead to the greatest good. Rules can be useful because it's not realistic to expect everyone to make complex calculations before they make decisions. But ultimately, the point of having rules is to create the greatest good.
I'm very much against the idea that we should have moral obligations compelling us to act in a certain way. I think it's nice to act in certain ways. For example, if someone was being tortured and all I needed to do to stop them being tortured was to blink, or obviously I'd blink because that would be being nice, but I wouldn't have any obligation morally to blink. It would just be the nice thing to do, and I would obviously blink because I'm not a complete horrible person.
It doesn't make sense to state that choosing not to blink isn't immoral, but if you choose not to blink, you're a horrible person. It seems to me that this choice of words may indicate that vegan foot soldier's conclusion is not in line with his moral intuitions in the first place. How can you make normative judgments that are unrelated to your moral system? You're literally stating that the inaction isn't morally wrong, but then you're using language which suggests that I would be doing something wrong if I let the child die. You would have to say that there's nothing immoral about allowing a child to suffer and die when you could prevent that from happening by donating 2 pence.
Sure, there's absolutely nothing immoral about that whatsoever, because if I didn't also donate to Cancer Research UK, Comic Relief, British Hearts Foundation, the Macmillan Cancer Support, British Red Cross, Children in Need, Salvation Army, Oxfam, WWF, UNICEF, Save the Children, St John's Ambulance, Royal British Legion, Samaritans and Greenpeace and Great Ormond Street Hospital, Alzheimer's Research UK, Barnardo's, Age UK, Alzheimer's Society, if I didn't donate to all of these charities, if there was a single charity that I could donate to but I didn't donate to, then I would be immoral by this way of thinking.
Regarding the hypothetical situation of the child dying of thirst in front of our cottage, Vegan Footsoldier proposed that if it's true that we have an obligation to help this child dying from thirst, then this implies that we also have an obligation to help other people out of their suffering by donating to charity if we can easily do so. He then draws the conclusion that this is absurd, and therefore it can't be the case that we have an obligation to help the dying child in the hypothetical. Personally, I tend to draw a different conclusion here. I think it's wrong not to help other people who are suffering when we easily can. I think this applies in the scenario where the child is dying in front of our cottage, and I also think it applies in the charity scenario. Even if, in this charity scenario, our moral intuitions aren't as clear as they are with the scenario of the girl dying in front of our cottage. Vegan Footsoldier listed a lot of different charities, suggesting that to be consistent we would need to donate to every charity in existence. When attempting to help others, it's important that we don't neglect effectiveness and opportunity costs. The effective altruism movement advocates using evidence and reasoning to determine how to help others most effectively. It's not just about taking actions that benefit others, but it's about using our time and money in the most cost-effective way, because that is what will lead to the most good. Therefore, I'm not suggesting that we should give to every charity in existence, because that would be an ineffective use of our resources. Instead, we can strive to have the biggest impact possible by giving our money to those charities who save the most lives or do the most good with our money. Organisations like GiveWell and Animal Charity Evaluators try to transparently assess the cost-effectiveness of different charities, focusing on human issues or animal issues respectively, and they both have lists of their recommended charities.
But even if I donated only 2 cents or 2p to all of these charities in the world, I wouldn't have any money. I'd be bankrupt instantly. It's not possible.
Again, when we're thinking of doing good, we should not neglect effectiveness. Over the course of your life, how can you do the most good possible? Not by giving everything you have up now and living on the street. You need to look after your physical health, your mental health, and your social life. To donate everything you have today and then live on the street wouldn't be optimal, because your ability to do the most good can be improved if you lived a sustainable life.
If you take this weird line of thinking, then even the people who donate the most amount of money, like Warren Buffett and Bill Gates, those people are immoral because they could donate more.
I think it's fair to say that even Bill Gates could have done more or been more moral. However, I don't think it's helpful to have a black and white perspective when it comes to morality and label people as immoral or evil if they're not living a perfectly moral life, because none of us are. We live in an extremely complex world, and many of our actions will positively or negatively impact others around us without us even knowing about it. Our perception and cognitive abilities are limited and sometimes systematically biased. For example, we tend to neglect opportunity costs when making everyday decisions, meaning that we don't consider what else we could have done with our time and money, such as donating to charity rather than buying a new TV set. And we rarely consider what exactly the costs of that decision are. In this scenario, it could be several lives not being saved. Ultimately, we have to accept that we are not perfectly rational beings, and we sometimes take actions that aren't even in alignment with our values. Despite our limitations, or one might argue because of them, we should strive to do as much good as possible without allowing ourselves to be set back by the fact that we're not morally perfect. We can acknowledge that we are just apes and we inevitably will make mistakes. It seems to me that such an attitude is crucial if we want to improve ourselves and improve the positive impact we can have on the lives of others. Bill Gates paid $30 million for a book written by Da Vinci. Now that money could have changed the lives of thousands of people who are now blind from easily preventable conditions. How can we value one book over even one individual's ability to see? The behaviour of spending that much money on a book while people are suffering more than we can imagine from easily preventable conditions and diseases, that behaviour is unethical. Now, Bill Gates is probably one of the most effective altruists of all time. He has done an immense amount of good. He has changed many people's lives forever. But he's also done some things that deserve criticism. And I think it's fair to say that he could have done more. And I don't think that's necessarily a worrisome conclusion to come to. Furthermore, what do we do when there's a conflict between the rights of two individuals? How do we decide whose rights are more important?
Sure, Tom Reagan wrote about this extensively. Even on his Wikipedia page, there is a really good explanation of the main two principles, the mini-ride principle and the worse-off principle.
So I'm going to read out the section on Tom Reagan's worse-off principle because I think it's a very interesting principle to sit in a deontological theory. When individuals involved are not harmed in a comparable way, given a certain course of action, we should mitigate the situation of those who would be worse off. Thus, if the harm of a few innocent beings is greater than the harm to many innocent beings, the right action is to override the rights of the many. It sounds as if Tom Reagan believed that if there was a conflict of rights, he would come out the closet as a utilitarian and weigh up the consequences. He would rather violate the rights of more individuals if this resulted in less suffering. This is what a utilitarian approach would conclude.
Peter Singer does actually advocate for a conscientious omnivore type position, quote unquote.
For consequentialists, morality isn't black and white. If Singer's position is that it's a moral good to buy free-range meat, then I disagree with him. But I would agree that it's morally better than buying factory-farmed meat. The fact that I would prefer that one woman was to be slapped than 100 be stabbed doesn't mean that I'm celebrating the fact that a woman got slapped. I would rather nobody got hurt at all.
Slapping people and stabbing people, they're both immoral. But your position is saying, no, in this case, slapping the woman was moral. That's what your position commits you to do.
No, it doesn't. It just commits me to saying slapping one is better than stabbing 100.
Humans in our society are enslaving, torturing, abusing, and exploiting animals for financial gain. It's our society. We're part of that society. And although some vegans feel like it's good enough just to not contribute to it personally, to personally not buy these products, that's the de facto position that you just don't contribute yourself. I think because we're part of the society that is causing this atrocity to happen, we feel obligated to speak up and say something ourselves.
What if it was the case that aliens came down to Earth and created the animal holocaust? Or if it was the case that the animal holocaust was taking place on a different planet? Would you then not want to help these animals? If you put yourself in the perspective of the individual animal, do you think you would care whether or not humans are the cause of the suffering? From the animal's perspective, whether the suffering is caused by humans or whether the suffering occurs naturally just isn't relevant.
On a pragmatic level, it's almost always worse to intervene because we invariably muck things up. And that's my main objection.
The risk of making things worse is a concern, which is why we need to conduct research looking into how we can help wild animals while minimizing the risk of negative effects associated with any intervention. This is something that the movement to reduce wild animal suffering is very aware of. However, just because we are dealing with a complex problem, that doesn't mean we shouldn't try to find a solution. Yes, we have to be aware of and learn from previous human interventions that have made things worse for wild animals. But I don't think we should reach the conclusion that human intervention is going to inevitably make things worse. I think a common mistake that people who may disagree with me on this may commit is to look at failed conservation efforts that weren't designed to improve the well-being of wild animals. They look at that and then they state that human intervention is categorically bad. Our societies haven't strived to improve the lives of wild animals, and to date, we simply haven't got the empirical data to believe that human intervention to improve the lives of wild animals will invariably make things worse.
Hancock explains, perhaps inadvertently, exactly why it would be so far-fetched, using a quote from Richard Dawkins, who I'm a massive fan of.
The total amount of suffering per year in the natural world is beyond all decent contemplation. During the minute that it takes me to compose this sentence, thousands of animals are being eaten alive. Many others are running for their lives, whimpering with fear. Others are slowly being devoured from within by rasping parasites. Thousands of all kinds are dying of starvation, thirst, and disease. It must be so. If there is ever a time of plenty, this very fact will automatically lead to an increase in the population until the natural state of starvation and misery is restored. The point Dawkins is making here is that evolution doesn't care about the well-being of individuals. Dawkins is not saying that it is impossible to improve the lives of wild animals through human stewardship.
Not only would it be foolish to try and reduce this level of suffering in nature, it would also just be an impossibility.
I really don't think it would be foolish to try and reduce wild animal suffering, and I don't think it's impossible. In 2018, BBC filmmakers for a David Attenborough documentary built a ramp in the snow to allow a group of penguins to escape a ravine they were trapped in. The penguins were probably going to starve to death. Were the filmmakers foolish to try and help them? This wasn't a well-researched intervention with intelligent people working out how to best improve the lives of wild animals in a cost-effective and scalable way. This was just some filmmakers who happened to be at the right place in the right time, and yet I think most of us think they did the right thing by intervening. If you think what the filmmakers did was right, then surely you can get behind more organised and more well-researched actions that use the best available evidence to work out how we can help animals who are suffering in the wild.
It's like saying you want to eradicate one of the poles of a magnet. The second you chop off one of the poles of the magnet, well then the magnet has turned into two magnets and you've got two poles on both magnets again.
I am somewhat struggling to understand the magnet analogy, but I think it is making the point that with life comes inevitable pleasure and suffering. This is a difficult question in itself, but even if we grant this is the case, this doesn't mean that reducing wild animal suffering is impossible. Even if it is the case that certain negative experiences are inevitable, clearly not all of them are. So why wouldn't we try to reduce the number of bad experiences that we can influence? Our greater capacity to reason, communicate, influence, and shape the world around us is what distinguishes us from other animals on this planet. With these greater capacities comes not just an opportunity, but I think a responsibility to create a better world for every sentient being. When it comes to human suffering, we all agree that we should alter the world around us to make life better. We want to have a means of helping people when they break their leg in a mountaineering accident. Let's extend our circle of compassion and give equal consideration to non-humans. Evolution created this world and it didn't give a damn about the well-being of any of us. Let's use our intelligence to work towards a world where we all suffer less, including wild animals. So thank you for watching this video. If you would like to support my channel, you can find me on Patreon. You guys are giving me the ability to explore projects that I really think can make a difference. So thank you so much for all of your support, and I will see you in the next video.